Morning.
Everybody's looking good.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hi.
Everybody's looking.
Shall we?
Yeah, I was muted.
All righty. I'm Bob Wolf, and I chair SPICE. For those of you who don't know me, on behalf of SPICE and the SPICE Committee, I'd like to welcome you. We hope all of you are well, and your loved ones as well. And we hope also that everyone had a chance to vote. And what we may our next meeting of SPICE, we may still not know who's what, but that's okay.
Oh, shit.
First of all, I want to thank Nadine Fox and her team, Sarah Califf and Sarah Friedman. Nadine had come to the SPICE board and suggested that we run a food drive for JFS. Food insecurity has gotten worse and worse with the pandemic, and they had a great success. We got a whole bunch of people driving into the JFS by the library. The three ladies sat out in the rain and collected over 60 bundles of canned goods and over $600 in cash and gift cards, which JFS was tickled pink about. So thank you all who participated, and especially all who gave. Just a note, we are, thanks to Zoom, now putting all SPICE programs online to view after the program, which is a great thing. I know the Moulters, for instance, are having family meetings where they'll go back and look at these and then have a family discussion. So it's a chance for you to widen the circle of who sees these. And for those people who can't make it, they can go back. The two prior programs from this year, How Science Replaced God and The Jewish Influence on Broadway, are up. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, today's program should be up within 48 hours. Reminder coming up on Wednesday, November 18th, get your gastric juices flowing. Manishtan, why is this Thanksgiving different from all other Thanksgivings? With Chef Alyssa, who we've known and grown to love. After today, a reminder, after today's program, stay on, because we're going to go into breakout rooms. You'll be assigned them at random, give you a chance for 15 minutes to socialize, catch up with some old friends, and maybe meet some new ones. So today's program is a return of one of our favorite presenters, Dr. Tom Hanchett, who's going to talk to us about how Charlotte is being segregated by race and class. And now Stefan Pinkney, who's our co-chair of our program committee, will introduce him. Stefan.
Good morning, everybody. And I think most of you are familiar with Tom Hanchett. He has appeared at SPICE several times before, talked about different subjects. Not going to spend too much time. He has a lot of accolades and so on. But the main thing that he is known for is for many, many years, he was the in-house historian for the Museum of New South. And is responsible for many of the exhibits there that I think many of us attended. I remember the first one was, I think, Cotton to Skyscrapers, the change of Charlotte, but also the whole New South, from textile and cotton to banking and industry and other things. One of the most memorable exhibits that I think many of us attended, but of course it was harrowing, was lynching. And I remember one of the things that really surprised me at that exhibit was that it was not just a matter of occurring in the South, that it was throughout. But many of us were shocked by that exhibit, and I think great amount of members of the temple attended. Tom is now on his own, still dealing with history, and writes a lot of articles to the Observer, writes some books, and he can tell you about the books that he has written recently, and writes about different subjects, so continues to write about history of Charlotte. But one of the things is, for those that are foodies, he explores and finds out all kind of interesting places in Charlotte to eat and writes about them, writes a view about them, and the great diversity that we have now, and then great, of course, diversity of foods that we have, especially along Central Avenue. I think that just a whole international assembly. You can have foods from just about anything. So, Tom, let you be the speaker now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Stefan. That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Bob Wolf. And thank you, the kind of quiet behind the scenes folks, Natalie and Tracy, who are making all of this go and have done so much planning today. Always a joy to meet with SPICE folks. I wish we could be in person, but I'm glad that you all at least are going to get into these breakout rooms. My part of the morning is about an hour to about noon, and then we'll aim for the breakout rooms after that. If you have not yet, find the chat. It's probably down at the bottom of your screen. It's a little speech bubble thing. Click on that. And I have already put some references there to some of the books and other things that I'll talk about today. I would love to get your comments, questions, disputes, anything. And we'll try and address those as we go along, as well as at the end. I'm going to be mostly talking about this wonderful book called Sorting Out the New South City. There's a new second edition out that brings the story right up to the present, including all of the newcomers that are showing up here. So if you are a newcomer, or even if you're thinking about coming to Charlotte, I know we have a few folks like that who are sitting in today, Sorting Out the New South City. There's a book nationally, just recently. My book's about 20 years old. The new edition is this year, but there's a new book out, a New York Times bestseller called The Color of Law. And it's about how, like Stephen Pinckney said about lynching, a lot of these segregation things maybe weren't as overt in the North, but man, they were up there. And so this is a national story, The Color of Law. And also, if you're interested in education, I know we have many education activists in this room with us today. Color and Character, it's a national story about the ongoing push and pull about what's a good education in America. And it's a national study that focuses on West Charlotte High School here in our own city. So it's just some things to look about and dig in further if you want to. My website is www.historysouth.org. And I've got food tips there. I've got walking tours and all sorts of other fun stuff. But enough commercial. Let me share the screen and show you some slides and talk about that book, Sorting Out the New South City. Now close your eyes. I don't want you to see how messy my life really is, but let's see if we can. There you go. So everybody see a screen, kind of nod your head if you see a screen, Sorting Out the New South City. I see some nods. That's good. I can't see all of you. So like I say, use the chat and be part of this. Good thing. I've actually heard the presentation before. It gets boring if only I talk. So looking forward to having you. New edition out from UNC Press in time for the Republican National Convention that didn't exactly happen. We figured a lot of people nationally, internationally would be interested in the story of Charlotte. So we're glad this is out. Amazon has it right now on a nice discount if you like discounts. If you like an author signed copy, there's some at Park Road Books. And what I'm going to do today is kind of ironically summarize this so you don't really have to read it if you don't want to. But I'm going to try and I'm going to pull out a thread. And the thread is about segregation. If you ask me, when I came here in 1981 to work for the Historic Landmarks Commission, segregation this is a southern city. There's always been segregated. That's what I would have said. I would have been wrong. Well, how about end of the Civil War, 1865? Nope. 1870s, end of Reconstruction? Nope. Segregation really popped into focus around 1900. And y'all are looking at me skeptical. 1900, what's going on in the South in 1900? Well, I had no idea, but I'm going to try and show you. And there's a real hinge in history there, a thing where a lot of stuff changes really quickly, right around 1900. But it's not just that moment. People made choices that kept reinforcing this new pattern of segregation all throughout the 20th century. Choices layered on top of each other until today, even if you don't believe in separation, you want people to come together, there's still this thing that we've learned. Something new comes into our neighborhood, a new land use, a new group of people, rental housing, and your shoulders kind of go up. And that's learned, which is kind of depressing. But the flip side of that is if people made choices that created segregation, we are people. So we can create something else. Now, when I'm talking about segregation, I'm not just talking about racial segregation. I'm also talking about economic segregation, which is something that we talk about all the time in America without actually talking about it because it's impolite to talk about it. But this is Mecklenburg County. Even if you have no idea what this map is, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, right at the middle of it. We've got two Charlottes. Now they're calling us the Crescent and the Wedge. The Wedge is Southeast Charlotte, from the center city down to Myers Park, down to the JCC, down to South Park Mall, down to Ballantyne. The Crescent is much less well-to-do. It's from the airport. Nobody lives at the airport. Johnson C. Smith University, Central Avenue, where I live. In the Crescent, much less well-to-do. And it's possible, in fact, it's really easy in Charlotte to be stuck in your bubble, to go to school, to go to church, go to the gym, go to everything, work, the mall, pretty much with people like you. And had somebody who said, you can be a prisoner of your zip code when it comes to your mindset, your assumptions about the city, and everybody's like you, right? Because that's who you see most of the time. And when I say you, I mean me too. I'm not putting this on anybody. This is just the world that we have grown up in. There's kind of a break here, maybe around $45,000 a year, down in the Wedge. If you're making $45,000 a year, you're not making very much. Folk kind of look at you like you're poor. Whereas in the Crescent, if you're making $45,000 a year, man, most of your neighbors will never make $45,000 a year. So two Charlottes. And this was really, brought home to me in a way that I still remember. About 10 years ago, down in Ballantyne, there was an attempt to build some affordable housing down here, very well-to-do, newly developed area that has never had housing built for median income, much less folks below median income. Attempted about 10 years ago. There's been a new attempt that seems to be gaining some traction right now, but this is 10 years ago. And somebody stood up in a meeting and said, I don't want that crap next to me. Well, the affordable housing was for people making $45,000 a year. And I was making $45,000 a year. I'm a teacher. I get paid as a teacher. And when I kind of got over the taking offense, I kind of felt sorry for the person that stood up in the meeting, because they want to live in a world with no teachers, with no police trainees, with no first responders, with no nurses, nurse assistants, food prep people. Wow. So like I say, it's real easy to kind of get stuck in your bubble. Could you imagine a city with no economic segregation? Could that ever happen? What would it look like? Well, it might look like Charlotte in 1875. This is the first ward. Charlotte had 4 wards, 4 election districts. 1875, 10 years after the Civil War, Charlotte was in the middle of a boom. Railroads had come in the 1850s, Civil War, no battles here. And so, we were doubling in size every 20 or 30 years and building new stuff. And first city, good city map is what you see here. Divided into 4 election districts, 4 wards along Trade Street, bottom of the map, that's East Trade Street, and Tryon Street. There's Trade and Tryon, and you go up here, and there's Discovery Place, and there's Levine Museum, where I worked for so long. Basically, dividing the city into 4 along Trade and Tryon. So I had this resource rather, and I did some research to bring out more information. I said, who was where? What was the land use pattern? It's a thing called the city directory. Comes out every year, still does. It's kind of like the phone book on steroids. It's got a lot more information. And so I sat there and I key entered for days and days all of the folks who lived in the first ward. Not just the folks who lived there, but also the businesses. And look, red pins are the businesses. They're all clustered at Trade and Tryon Streets. Not a big surprise. Historians love predicting the past. Yep, got it right. But that set me up for 2 surprises. One was the blue pins. The blue pins, can you see blue pins here? Blue pins are white folks who own their own business, and they are everywhere. There's not a wedge. There's not a exclusive neighborhood. I never thought about the term exclusive neighborhood. We'll come back to that. So, wow, green pins, white folks who didn't own their own business, but had kind of like white collar jobs, and they're everywhere. Brown pins, folks who work with their hands, harness makers, carpenters, people like that, they're kind of everywhere. White pins, people didn't list what they did in the city directory, so there they are just as placeholders. The yellow pins were the second surprise. Some of the names in the city directory had a little C next to them, which stood for colored. Oh, there was a black neighborhood in First Ward? Turned out that was kind of the wrong question, but I'm glad I asked. I started putting in pins, and up here in the upper right, each of these is one household. So there's 5 or 6 black households there, 4 here, lower left, about 5 or 6. But actually, African Americans lived on every single block of First Ward 10 years after the Civil War. Some of those, I'm sure, lived in the old slavery time quarters. But Charlotte was growing. There were some homeowners. There were some new black churches. In fact, here at the upper left is First United Presbyterian Church. That was a black church built right after the Civil War in an area that had a lot of white people. Black church, white people. They didn't see a problem, evidently. In fact, they did not see a problem as late as around 1900. This is, I've been seeing this. I just, you see what you expect to see. The white building on the right where it says College Street, that's Levine Museum of the New South, where you should go visit, by the way. They're open again. But when you come out, right across the street is First United Presbyterian Church, blue dot, this big African-American church built by its congregation a generation after the Civil War. Wow. That part of it is, I kind of get, that's really cool. So that's built in 1896, but a block away is Spirit Square. Many of you have been to Spirit Square Art Center, but it's the old First Baptist Church, white church. So you got a leading white church, a leading black church, a block apart. If those had been built when I was growing up, those would have been built on opposite sides of town. Racial attitudes change. Just because something is this way now doesn't mean it always was or that it always has to be. And I'm still getting my head around that. So I could stop there, but I ain't going to because I still got more time. And I want to tell you some more history because we keep coming back to 1900. What the heck was going on in 1900? I apologize for showing you this next slide. This is from what was proudly called the White Supremacy Campaign of 1898-1900. Not something the media, gave a name to. This is something that leaders, white leaders in the South, proudly unfurled this banner of white supremacy. Why'd they do that? Why then? Well, in the early 1890s, let me give you some economic background because economics turns out to be really important. Early 1890s, there was a depression, economic downturn. Now, you and I have lived through a recession, right? 2008, and could just be me. Since 2008, has politics gotten uglier? That often happens when there's economic stress because people lose their jobs, their houses foreclose, their business, and they want somebody to blame. But the other thing that can happen, and it kind of did happen in 2008. Remember, Black folk and white folk got together and voted for a Black president, 2008, remember that? Well, in the 1890s, on the heels of that depression, Black and white in North Carolina, same thing happened all across the South. North Carolina was specifically called the fusion. Black and white voting together. The fusion. Now, not all white folks would vote for the fusion. The men of property and standing up at the top of the pyramid would never vote with formerly enslaved people. But a lot of white folks did. And they started to change government to help the little guy. Both houses of the state legislature in Raleigh, governor's chair, and bam, there was a backlash. How dare you take government out of the hands of the men who own the property and put it in the hands of those who are ignorant and own no property. That was the mayor of Charlotte. Now those words seem to resonate in ways way beyond 1898. I think we're still arguing over this, vision of American democracy. Is government for the men of property, or is it for the rest of us? But anyway, Charlotte Observer, very much on the side of the men of property because they were the advertisers, said it was time to end this rule of Negroes and the lower class of whites. Find what we would now call a wedge issue. White supremacy is the issue. Headlines in the Charlotte Observer quoting the political leaders here in the city and across the state. White supremacy is the issue. If you can get white folks to vote white, they will vote against their economic interest. And it worked. Around 1900, all sorts of violence, voter intimidation, lynching. Stephen Pinckney talked about the lynching exhibit at Levine Museum of the New South. High point of lynching in the United States is around 1900 in the South. It's terrorism. But what you see here, front page of the Raleigh News and Observer, main newspaper of record in North Carolina, is kind of, maybe overstating this, but it's kind of cultural terrorism. It's a political cartoon on the front page of the Raleigh News and Observer, 1898. And I didn't find this. I was teaching at Chapel Hill and I sent my students to their hometown newspaper, see if you can find anything about the 1898 white supremacy campaign. Somebody brought this back and I was just blown away. One of my students said, why is there a political cartoon on the front page of a paper? They don't do that now. And I was really glad when another student put their hand up and said, well, back then, a lot of us were farmers. We learned farming from our parents. We didn't learn it out of books. But if you go down to the general store, you don't have to buy the newspaper. You don't have to read the newspaper. Look at the picture and it tells you who to blame. Negro rule. Now, in reality, there was no Negro rule in North Carolina. Even areas like Wilmington, North Carolina, majority Black, whites were still in the majority of this new fusion government. But nonetheless, Negro rule. Look, he's laying waste to our state and he's got his foot on our ballot box and he's reaching out for our women and children. Student put their hand up. Women and children couldn't vote. Why are they in a political cartoon? Another hand went up. If you can fold sexual fear, particularly fear for our children, into your appeal, you've got something powerful. And it worked. 1900, North Carolina, most other southern states did the same thing a few years earlier, a few years later, right about 1900. North Carolina put in place a new constitution. Said you had to pay to vote. Now there was fancy language. I knew the fancy language. I missed the main point. They got me. That's what you do with fancy languages. You fool people like me. It was called the poll tax. There was a grandfather clause. I could tell you all about that, but I missed the main point, which was you had to pay to vote. From 1900 to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, those poll taxes were a pretty standard thing throughout the South. You know, who's going to have an easy time paying to vote? Men of property. Who's going to have a hard time paying to vote? Rest of us. And if you could pay to vote, there was another thing, didn't sound like voter suppression, just sounded like common sense, a literacy test. Y'all are literate. You could pass a literacy test, no problem. I'm the registrar. All you had to do was come down to the courthouse, stand in front of the registrar. That doesn't intimidate you, does it? Stand in front of the registrar, and all I did would, as the registrar, I would ask you to read and interpret the Constitution. You want to try that? To the satisfaction of the registrar. If I don't want you to vote, you ain't going to vote. And that literacy test literally did stay in place right till the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It meant that the registrar could kick out pretty much any African American that he or she wanted to. And frankly, any white person who was likely to vote the wrong way get kicked out too. Wow. So that's all politics. I've been trying to talk about cities. Let me talk about what happens in the wake of that successful 1898 white supremacy campaign.
Tom?
It kicks up a level of hate and it changes society. Bob Wolf, we have a question, a comment?
Well, I just want to say also that 1896, if my memory is correct, was Plessy versus Ferguson, where the Supreme Court said separate but equal, and that lasted till Brown versus Education in 54. So that was also one of the basis for all of this from the legal standpoint.
Yeah, and you know, when kind of, you know, when the grown-ups give you permission to do something that you've wanted to do but you've been too polite to do, it's kind of human nature to seize that. And so, you know, what is happening between Plessy versus Ferguson and these new constitutions in the South is demonization of Black people. You don't want those people near you. Look what they just did with politics. And so not all, but nearly all of the hyper segregation that I grew up with turns out to have been new around 1900. Train stations. I can remember separate white and colored waiting rooms in the train stations, bus stations, new in Charlotte, 1896. African Americans sit at the back of the bus, originally the back of the streetcar, new North Carolina law, 1903. Down at the courthouse, you swore on a Bible in court. All of a sudden, 1901, Mecklenburg County Courthouse, separate white and colored Bibles. And out in the suburbs, written into the deeds, new restrictive covenants. This property shall be used only by members of the Caucasian race. Racial segregation written right into the deed. For a house costing not less than X number of dollars. Economic segregation written right into the deed. Which is what they meant by exclusive neighborhood. Neighborhoods that exclude, written right into the deed. And even areas that were already built up. This is the same map I showed you before, 1875, before the white supremacy campaign. I've just kind of closed in on it so you can see white, black, all living in very close proximity. This is before the white supremacy campaign. I mapped the same area 10 years after. So here's before, here's after. Yellow pins, black folk, blue pins, white folk. Now I don't want to give you a sense there's just one black neighborhood surrounded by whites. It's more like a quilt, black neighborhood, white neighborhood, black neighborhood, white neighborhood. Isn't that something? That is amazing. Segregation is not natural. It's not normal. It's not just that they like to be with their own kind. I've heard that. It's not just the market at work. I've heard that. It was created. So the early 20th century, we're kind of working out how to do this separate city thing. And this is the moment in which you get fully formed black neighborhoods. This is the Brooklyn neighborhood. You may not have heard of Charlotte's Brooklyn, but if you've ever been to the government center, downtown aquatic center, the mayor's office, planning office, school board, courts, fancy hotels, all of that, that was Brooklyn. And it was named around 1900 by African Americans who were getting pushed out of these other neighborhoods. Brooklyn, New York, some of you know Brooklyn, New York, up close and personal. That was the moment that Brooklyn, New York came into New York City as a borough, a city within a city. And so here's our Brooklyn. On the upper right, J.T. Williams, Dr. J.T. Williams, a licensed physician.
Tom, are you showing a slide? Because we're not seeing it.
You're not seeing slides. That's kind of weird.
We see it. We see it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
see it also.
We see it.
Everybody see it?
We see it. We all see it.
I see it too.
It never fails that about every second time we do Zoom, all of us learn something new about Zoom.
Yeah. Hit the share screen. You got to be on share screen.
Yeah, and I am currently sharing
Yeah.
screen and some people are seeing it.
I see it.
Yeah, we see
I
it.
see it.
Yeah, I see it. I can see it.
If there's somebody who cannot see it, why don't you try chatting with Bob in the comments? And we'll see whether it's a more widespread thing or a least widespread thing. I'll try and, I used to work in radio long ago, so I'll try and do the radio thing where I tell you what you might be seeing if we're losing some people.
Maybe those who can't see it should turn their video off.
That might be worth trying. Well, if you can see the slide, at the upper right, there's a very distinguished guy who's Dr. J.T. Williams. There's a school named after him today. He was not only a physician, he was also a U.S. diplomat to Sierra Leone in West Africa around 1900. Came back, built the house that you see at the upper left, big two-story house on Brevard Street, doctor's house next to his, and then church, that's Grace AME Zion Church, which still stands. one of the business buildings in the distance, and then down below the Black Main Street, which was 2nd Street, today Martin Luther King Boulevard. Black architect did the Afro-American Mutual Insurance Company building in the middle here, a big 3-story brick building. In the distance, there's a tree, and under that tree, the first Black public library in North Carolina. On the map on the slide to your right, there's the Second Ward High School, which was the Black high school for about a generation here. So a complete neighborhood. You could walk to everything. And most of the folks didn't own their own homes. About 7 to 10% something did own their own homes. Most African Americans were renters, working class folk. And this was not unlike the white community. But in the white community, you could pretty much settle anywhere around town. Here, you were squeezed into this Brooklyn neighborhood, and absentee landlords took advantage of that. They built squished together houses, and what you see in the lower left is a row of those houses. And I'm going to spend just a second talking about that, because I'm on a journey too. I'm learning new stuff all the time, some of it about me, which I sometimes am not real proud of. And this is one of those moments. I look at that slide, and houses all ramshackle and kids playing in the dirt in front. And I go, man, what a bad neighborhood. Those must be bad people. And I'm ashamed to tell you that, but as I've looked more at this, I've gone, well, you know, those houses have not been painted except maybe once in their life, but it's not the tenant's job to paint the house. Houses are squished close together, but tenants didn't build the house. And the kids are playing out there because there's no sidewalk, but it's not the tenant's job to build the sidewalk. I'm coming to the realization that, well, for one thing, this might not be a bad neighborhood, because those kids can walk to any of these places. They have all these different role models, all these different job opportunities. But if there are bad people, they're probably not the folks in the houses. They're the absentee landlords, the investors who created that situation. So do we have the slides back for most folks? And I'm seeing Bob, I can see Bob's face, and he just nodded affirmative. So I
Yes.
think we're
Yes.
great. So it's not just Black neighborhoods. White working class neighborhoods also become increasingly set apart. This is what's now NODA. If you've been up to NODA now, it's a great place to exercise your elbow, drink beer, named now after North Davidson Street, which runs through the middle here. Very creative area. But initially it was known as North Charlotte, laid out in 1903 around this big textile mill where Heist Brewery is today. And has its own downtown. That's kind of weird. Well, in 1903, same year this was laid out, one of the downtown ministers, one of the men of property and standing, put a sermon in the paper. I think he was talking about NODA. He said, just at this point in the development of the mill people, white working class people, many of whom had voted for the fusion. Just at this point in the development of the mill people, perhaps it is better to let them form a class to themselves. Their own churches, their own schools, their own stores, rather than mix promiscuously with the better class. And well-to-do white folk began to pull apart as well. This is Myers Park. I love Myers Park. I helped put it on the National Register of Historic Places, designed by an important Boston landscape architect. Greenway parks, tree-shaded streets, actually moved the trees in. Queens Road, been on Queens Road, it made sense originally. There was a streetcar that was supposed to run all the way around it. Gates at the front. Center gates are gone. Side gates are still up there by Presbyterian Hospital. And gates. Y'all been to Myers Park? You ever been lost in Myers Park? Can't prove it, but I don't think it's an accident. our city grids where we can find each other start to break down about 1900 into these self-contained street systems, which exclude people. They're exclusive. And it gets worse. The 1930s, there is a depression. You all know about that. Banks teetering, mortgage market freezes, did the same thing in 2008. So the feds help the banks. These are two different kind of unrelated things, both intended to get banks lending again, unfreeze the mortgage market. On the left, redlining, which is now illegal. But back in the 30s, the federal government did redlining. They weren't interested in the red thing. They were interested in the green and the blue. What this was credit mapping. Did it in every city around the United States. Sent somebody in, talked with the real estate leaders, the men of property and standing, said, where are the good credit risk neighborhoods? Great idea. If you can map those, then the credit will flow from Boston or wherever to Charlotte or Youngstown or, well, you know what, you ask those guys what the good neighborhoods are, and guess what? They tell you Myers Park, Eastover, there's Dilworth, green and blue, almost as good. There's Elizabeth, there's Plaza Midwood, where I live, there's the Charlotte Country Club. All neighborhoods on the southeast part of the city, just about all neighborhoods that had been deed restricted a generation earlier. Any area that had Black people, Johnson C. Smith area, near the university there, college professors, red. It's really hard to get a mortgage if there are any Black people in your neighborhood. Wow. And then on the right, separate program, but same effort, help the banks. FHA, new federal agency, it's still with us, Federal Housing Administration. And what they did initially was genius. They said, banks make long-term mortgages. We will insure them. Banks by themselves, when just the market was working, you had to pay back your mortgage in 2 years, 5 years. You had to put 50% down. With the feds, 20-year mortgage, tiny down payment. All of a sudden, a lot of us bought houses. Great thing. My dad came out of World War II, got a VA FHA mortgage. That's how we owned our own house. Well, the FHA didn't want to be stupid, so they hired a PhD scholar out of Chicago, and he had this study of all of these factors in what makes a good neighborhood over time. And this is the ethnicity list. Most favorable come first in the list, those exerting the most detrimental effect appear last. Good groups, English, German, Scots, Irish, Scandinavians, number 2, North Italians, number 3, Bohemians or Czechoslovakians, number 4, Poles, number 5, Lithuanians, Greeks, Russian Jews of the lower sort, Italians, South Italians, Negroes, and Mexicans. Isn't that something? And once again, you know, the people in charge are telling us this is okay. I mean, the more you look at it, the more angry I get. And the more I want to laugh. You know, where are Asian people? Chicago has a Chinatown. It did back in the 30s. Native American people always here. All Latinos are Mexicans. Russian Jews of the lower sort? What about other Jewish people? What's the thing with the North Italians and the South Italians? Well, I'll tell you, the Russian Jews of the lower sort, they were the most recent refugees. The pogroms were ongoing. They were getting kicked out of Russia. They were fleeing to any place. They did not learn English and save up. They were running for their lives. An immigrant caravan, we would now say, coming from a different era. But those refugees, you know, they're in this hierarchy which freezes at that moment. And it gets
Tom,
worse.
we have a question in the chat
I have a
box.
question. Excellent. I
Yeah,
thought we,
from Stephen Phillips, the Northeast has its problems, but why didn't it reach the degree of white supremacy frowned in the South?
that's a really good question. And I'll give you some factors. One is that things did get really ugly in the South. There's in the North rather. There's a book by the best historian of my generation, Thomas Shugru, looks like sugar, S-U-G-R-E, S-U-G-R-U, Shugru, about Detroit. And in Detroit, there weren't white and colored water fountains, but all the rest of this stuff, there it was. So that's one answer. But up north, you had multiple groups to blame. Up north, you had immigrants to blame, as well as Black people. And I lived in Youngstown, Ohio for a while in the 20s when all of this stuff was really brewing, coming out of the privations of the late teens, the pandemic, the World War, all of that. Youngstown voted in a Klan mayor for like 2 terms, Ku Klux Klan. And there were almost no Black people in Youngstown at that point. Why was the KKK there? Well, they were anti-immigrant. And so the immigration thing, the Black, white, down here in the South, it was real black and white, literally and figuratively. And so it was easy to be uglier towards Black people because you weren't distracted by the immigrants. And that's a callous thing to say, but thank you for a really good question. Well, let me keep going, because like I say, it gets worse. These things layer on top of each other. On the left is redlining in 1938. On the right is zoning in 1947. And a new idea, zoning. Who knew? Thought it'd always been here? Nope, 1947. It's when most cities got it. And zoning is about protecting single-family neighborhoods from invasion by undesirable outsiders. That was often the language. And green here on the right-hand map, those are the single-family neighborhoods, pretty much in the south and east of the city, once again. So you can see it layering on top of each other. And here is Brooklyn. Remember Brooklyn, Black neighborhood? In the redlining area, it's colored all red, which means even if you're getting ready to buy your home as an African-American, you're a business owner, whatever, you're not gonna get a mortgage. On the right, zoning, the bottom category is industrial. There was no industry in Brooklyn, but industrial meant anything goes. And all of Brooklyn, business district, upper income homes, and the rental stuff is all zoned industrial. If you're an investor, you own land there, you own old houses, you're gonna fix up those houses. The zoning tells you that higher and better use is coming. And so what you're doing is getting officially sanctioned disinvestment. And it gets worse. 1950s and 60s, there's federal money to demolish blight. Well, Brooklyn, by the 50s and 60s, is looking pretty blighted. And they don't even have to ask the people in Brooklyn, because this is before the 1965 Voting Rights Act. They have almost no political power. Brooklyn falls to the bulldozer. 1,000 families displaced, 200 businesses closed, most never reopened. A dozen houses of worship kicked out, one white church comes in. And this happened in every single American city. In fact, this is what got me charged up in my little town of Cortland, New York, because this happened basically when I was going into junior high. And so once again, a thing that happened all over the United States. I'm just showing it in Charlotte because I love Charlotte and I know Charlotte. I'm picking on somebody because I love them, but dang. And so what you end up with is hyper segregation in every American city, which looks normal because it's in every American city. This is the city I came to in 1980. There is the Wedge. Can you see that? JCC is probably down here, just getting built at that point. Here's the Crescent. And in 1980, most African Americans lived west of Tryon Street, which sets you up for what I want to talk about in the last 5 minutes, which is some changes. So look at that, black west side, white east side. 1960, Central Avenue, where I live, was 99% white. And I'm going to talk in a minute, like I say, about how that changed. But before that, this is another map where the more that I show it, I find stuff. Look where the highways ran. These are the interstates, all planned in the 50s, before the Voting Rights Act. There's Interstate 77 coming up through black neighborhoods. There's Interstate 85 cutting mostly through black neighborhoods. There's 277 swinging around downtown through black neighborhoods. So, like I say, this is depressing. Could things ever change? Well, I want to suggest in the last 5 minutes that they could and they are. We just have to grab hold of that and push it. What the heck am I talking about? Well, in the 60s and into the 70s, there was a set of new federal laws that actually did a lot to make cities better. Fair Housing Act, 1968, said you can't discriminate on the basis of race or ethnicity. We still do a little bit, but not like we used to. Community Reinvestment Act, 1977, said banks, you cannot redline. In fact, you have to invest in every part of every city. And our cities have begun to bounce back in our lifetime. You know about that. And that's not a coincidence. That is because of federal change. But in Charlotte, it's fascinating. Here is the older city, and you can see a lot of similarities between these two maps. But if you go out to the edge of the city, new stuff has happened because of these federal laws. Go out. When I came to Charlotte, west of the center city, nobody's going to live there who has any money or choice. Nope, never going to happen. Have you been out to Steel Creek recently? Same thing, north of downtown. Nobody's ever, have you been up here? Lake Norman, Davidson. Have you been over to Concord Mills Mall in the Mallard Creek area? Matthews, Mint Hill. Wow. So the old patterns, we're not stuck with them. We can change them. And this is true of race. Remember this map, which the east side of Charlotte where I live was 99% white. Here's the east side of Charlotte today. It looks like Charlotte. 25, 30, 40% African American, depending on exactly where you are. There are black pockets and white pockets, there are integrated pockets, but racial change does happen. In Steel Creek, look at the lower left. In Mallard Creek, up near Concord Mills Mall, look at the upper right. And so we don't have to live in a city where there are black people there and white people there. Immigrants. Immigrants are a new thing in this town. We had almost no immigrants in the last big wave, 1900. Folks went to New York because there was money up there, or they went to Pittsburgh or Youngstown or Cleveland or whatever. Now they're coming here. And anything on this map on the right that is gold is heavily immigrant. 1990, we had about 1% foreign born. Now it's 15, 16, 17%, something like that. Where do they live? Well, Central Avenue, a lot of businesses, a lot of immigrant folks living there. South Boulevard, yep. But also Valentine, down at the bottom of the map. And at the upper right, this dark gold, that's the Mallard Creek area up near Concord Mills Mall. One of the most diverse parts of the city, black, white, rich, poor, immigrant, and native. Can happen. And love the fact that the map on the right has almost nothing to do with the map on the left. It's a new pattern. We can make a new pattern.
There's a question, another question from the audience from Jerry Simon. How would you fit gentrification into this?
Hang on one second. I'm going to hit that right at the end. That is the question. This is the area where I live off of Central Avenue, which is mixed income. This is what we now call naturally occurring affordable housing. Nobody planned it to be affordable. It just got old and got affordable. That's why I live on the east side of Charlotte, was that, I don't make that much money, particularly when I was young. I was a renter, and so I could live here. Well, this kind of mixed income historically has been how America deals with affordable housing. Cool. I'm setting you up for the gentrification thing in a minute. Interesting thing in the short term is that the folks who really need the affordability now are immigrants. And so that's one of the reasons why Central Avenue is so immigrant rich when it comes to restaurants and grocery stores, is that we have that mix of housing affordability. This is one shopping center with a Mexican grocery store, a Salvadoran restaurant, an Arab market, a Vietnamese soup parlor, and then this market and restaurant run by Hamza and her friend from Somalia. And those of you who are thinking about northern cities, it used to be that all of them were in their neighborhood. Go to a place like Chicago now, go out to Midway Airport, and it's like this. It's this kind of salad bowl, not separate neighborhoods. Cool. And in Charlotte, just two last points. This is one. In Charlotte, we are growing so fast and so diverse. Almost no immigrants, African-American minority. That's what I grew up with in the South. As of 2010, we no longer have a white majority in Charlotte. White folks more than anybody else. Next largest ethnic racial group, native-born Black folks. If you add to that people of color from other parts of the world, it's slightly more than 50%. And as you can see on the right, it has not slowed our growth, our desirability. Young people in particular, and also cool folks our age, like living in diversity. Not everybody does. If you don't, that's fine. But in a way that has never been in Charlotte, we are really now in a kind of a golden age of folks coming together. Last slide. Gentrification messes with that. And all of us are still trying to figure out what that means. Take a look at that slide. I'm not going to read it all off to you, but the point is that every neighborhood in Charlotte is under pressure if it's anywhere close to the center city, because people with money and choice, us, by and large, are now moving inward. Used to be we all moved down to the suburbs. Now we're moving inward, which is kind of cool. But it puts pressure on existing naturally occurring affordable housing. This slide is a neighborhood near me, and big new house. And I look at that and I go, hey, whew, yes, indeed. Means my property values are going to go up. Smart boy. Well, remember I talked about my dad's FHA VA mortgage? Well, a couple of years ago, my wife and we paid off our mortgage. Yay. And I started saying, well, how do we get into this? And my dad gave me a loan for part of our down payment. I paid it back. But he was able to do that because he had that FHA VA mortgage. He was white, of German and English background. If he hadn't owned his own house, would I own my own house? And we paid it off a couple of years ago. So we got a little bit of money in the bank. We can pay the property taxes, even if the prices go up. But what if I was a grandma living on fixed income, living on Social Security in that white house, and I managed to scrimp and save, and I bought the house, and now the property taxes are going up? This is a scary scenario for people who don't look like me. What if I was a renter living in the yellow house? Am I going to have a house in the next year? And this is happening especially in Black neighborhoods, but it's even happening out towards the JCC. If you've been down to the Providence Fairview corner, you know, where there used to be all those apartments, which were kind of affordable, and now they're gone, and there's this new luxury stuff going up. And so what I'm realizing is that the advantages that I have reaped, I really need to pass along as we think about things like affordable housing, the housing bonds, which just passed very clearly in the Charlotte election. A lot of this stuff is still in play. It's not the ancient past. It sets the game plan, sets the game field for us. We can play the game in better ways perhaps than our parents did. But we need to recognize that, you know, this is part of our assumptions. I'm starting to preach, I shouldn't do that. Questions, comments, other things in the chat? I'll stop sharing the screen so I can see more people. Folks, if they want to unmute and literally ask me a question with your voice, you're welcome to try that.
Bob Larrick, isn't the question of, thank you for your very interesting talk. Isn't the issue of diversity a critical issue, not only in anti-Semitism, but housing and everything else, and what we like and what we don't like, and the importance of religious neighborhoods and the influences of people's values?
Yeah, that's very much wound up in all of this. My discovery, again, my own journey, is that it's not a fixed thing. That, you know, at one point, folks huddled around the synagogue or huddled around the Catholic Church or, you know, whatever, partly to worship together, but a lot because they would get beat up if they were in a diverse neighborhood. Today, we have moved away from much of that level of fear, and I'm hoping that we continue to move away from it. We need to kind of, I think, embrace that that coming together.
What do you think of it? I'm sorry, ADL working on those things with the mayor in our community?
Work and say that. Do you say ADO?
ADL, anti-hate campaign. I'm trying to get him to come to Charlotte and work with our community, and the Charlotte mayor who came to Temple Bethel on Martin Luther King Day, and the issues of cultures of mutual respect and consideration, which Rabbi Nichols is also very familiar with from up north, and Zion Church.
Great. And of course, Rabbi Judy has been so active at the Greenspon Institute at Queens, making these connections between the racial barriers to opportunity and the other kind of diversity that we're trying to grow in this community. So yes, absolutely.
Tom, Michael Norman, you talked about gentrification. My question is, if you own your home, you own your own home in an area that is getting pressure for gentrification, are you still immune from leaving? Does the fact of ownership, other than the pressure of others wanting you out, like developers, can you stand fast if you own your own home?
Yes, hopefully. Someone also is pointing out that their taxes are going up. As property values go up, so do taxes. I'm surrounded by $600,000 homes. My home is 850 square feet. My taxes are now very high. This is a very common issue here. And it's a lot of what is pushing people to sell when they don't want to sell. It's a lot of what's, it's a real issue. There is a program in Charlotte, know about this, called Aging in Place. It's particularly for low-income seniors. It should be expanded, I think, to all seniors, but we gotta push for that. But low-income seniors, currently you can apply and you get a property tax reduction. You know, you don't get free property tax, it comes back down a little bit. That I think is essential for many of us if we want to be able to stay in our home.
Thank you very much.
It's really tempting to want to sell, because I can sell my little bungalow that I paid $200,000 for, and I can sell it for $600,000. But where am I going to go with my $600,000? It's hard to find stuff in Charlotte now.
Thank you. Great talk.
Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate it, and fabulous as always. We unfortunately didn't have a chance to walk down the restaurant lane with you as always, but maybe we're not going to restaurants these days quite so often. So hopefully we'll see you soon, and maybe we'll be back to that as well. Just a reminder, on Wednesday the 18th, we have Thanksgiving with Chef Alyssa. And Natalie, you're going to break us up into chat groups now, so stay on, and we'll see who you end up with, but it'll be interesting in any case. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Terrific.
And
Thank you.